time to open this up to the panel. And as I say, I think it's pretty clear from those three presentations that it's not a question of not knowing what it is that we ought to be trying to deliver. The question is, how do we bring about that change? So I was going to open this up to the panel, but I was going to start with Guy as to whether and then move on to Derek, as to whether they had thoughts about the cost-benefit analysis of doing this as opposed to doing nothing for the services at the provision, where the points might be where you could apply a little bit of pressure and persuasion that this is worth delivering. It is, after all, for a relatively small group of people, then equally the cost because of that is not enormous. And the benefits appear to be so considerable. So I thought the starting point at this stage is to go, and I'll start with Guy, but I'd like to encourage the panel to intervene at will, and I won't interfere with that, to start just talking that issue through. Guy.
I think that the case to be made, if I was speaking to NHS England now, would be, you've got guidelines, we've got a number of centres of real excellence and expertise. These people who go through this experience are, in 80% of cases, there for long lives afterwards. So you want those lives to be the best possible quality, not simply for them because it's better for them, because actually it's much more efficient. Some of them, perhaps many of them, may be able to earn decent livings. So they won't be on benefits, you get them away from dependence. But how to achieve that? I think there are a number of things now. It should be possible to measure outcomes and collect data. And that will indicate two things. One, what sort of treatments or operative treatments are best for particular types of brain tumours or less damaging. And secondly, what therapies work best afterwards and where the money is best spent. But this is long term, and you need to start data collection as soon as possible, and you start it in your centres of excellence against the clinical guidelines, and you measure that, and you see what's being delivered. And then you can coordinate that, and you will get more efficient delivery. We all know if you have data, you say, gosh, we've been doing this for years, but actually it doesn't really work. Or we've just tried this and it appears to work, so you have to follow it up. But it shouldn't be hit and miss. But what must be clear is you need the equivalent of what in clinical negligence context is called a case manager. I used to do quite a lot of these brain-damaged children in cerebral palsy incidents. And when they recover large sums of money, they're not just given it. Part of the budget always goes to someone called a case manager, who is usually an occupational therapist or similar, or someone with that experience and training. And so you need case managers. They won't need one case manager to manage one child. You will have a case manager in Cambridge or in Nottingham or wherever who will manage a cohort and who will see that the patient every 3 months, 6 months, or however often you can do it sensibly, but coordinate the treatment, make certain they get their occupational therapist or their psychiatrist and how they're doing, what's working, what's not. But so I think it's a matter of data, coordination, and then someone to coordinate delivery of the aftercare. Because the aftercare isn't just for 6 months or as a year, as we all know. It goes on, well, it might go on for life, albeit diminishing in the sense that it's helpful to see somebody once a year, just how are you doing, what are your problems? So that would be my framework.
Thank you. I'm going to come to Derek, and in doing so, I was going to ask the question, we know that actually the NICE Children's Cancer Guidance, Derek will be aware of this, said in 2005 and repeated in 2014 that neurorehabilitation should be commissioned by trusts for children with brain tumours. 20 years or down the track, it hasn't happened. It's not a party political point because it crosses two political parties being in power. And I just wondered, Derek, if you answer the first question, whether you might also ponder as to what's gone wrong in terms of getting that to happen.
And can I also talk about what to do to fix it?
Yeah.
So firstly, it's not a party political point because actually, whether for good reason or bad, we have devolved responsibility to NHS England to deliver these services. And funny enough, this month, March is Brain Tumour Awareness Month. We should exploit that, and I don't mean that in any negative way, because MPs are more acutely aware, and peers will be more acutely aware of this whole subject this month. We kicked off on yesterday with a minute of silence and lots of just thinking about what we can do this month. There's will be a manifesto launched during the month. But I want to answer your question, Dominic, is make use of the Brain Tumour Awareness Month. In the NICE guidance, and the statement 4 says, children and young people with cancer and their families and carers have their psychological and social needs assessed at key points on their care pathway and receive support based on their identified needs. Now, your job, your challenge, is to get hold of your MP, connect with your MP, and ask them to ask Parliament, ask government, ask the Department of Health how we're doing on just that statement. There's 7 statements altogether. You can pick on any one you like, but get your MP to ask, or a peer that you have contact with, to ask the Department of Health how that's going in your area, where NHS has delivered in your area. So I have the way that NHS has delivered. So Cornwall and the Isle of Scilly has one integrated care board. I can ask them how they're doing on this. That will be a helpful tool that you can do to get your MPs to actually have something to do now that they're more aware of the situations. I also would, and I work with, obviously I'm chair of the APPG, and we do a lot to engage MPs, to engage with their constituents, because actually, Dominic, you'll remember this, we get involved in subjects because our constituents come and talk to us about their life experience. And then also the other opportunity available to you, and I really want to make sure we make this an opportunity for everybody to be involved. The Child Cancer Task Force, which is being chaired by Dame Caroline Dinenage, a good colleague of ours, and was in the health department, so she understands how it works. She's been tasked to try and identify how we really improve not just the treatment, but actually the outcomes for children. And she's out of the country at the moment, but I messaged her saying I was coming here, and having spoken to Helen, I asked, I'll be brief, but I asked Caroline, what would the task force actually be looking at, the survival and the quality of survival and the life chances of children once their cancer, if you like, had been cured or dealt with, when you got past that part of it. This was her response. She doesn't know I'm reading this, so I don't want to be unfair to her. But I'll read it to you exactly as she said it, and it's WhatsApp. So WhatsApp, it doesn't make complete sense. Just bear that in mind. It's done quickly, and I challenged her, and she responded. Yes, this is a key concern, in other words. So I asked a question about children, care services, occupational therapy, education, etc. Yes, this is a key concern. Currently, no substantial research in the UK. This is where I want you to help her with this. But in the study in the US, by the time childhood cancer survivors reach the age of 50, 100%, every single one, and you know this, I'm not teaching you anything at all, but this is what the US study showed, 100% experienced some long-term impact of their treatment. She said, I hope, so we need to move that on to we will. I hope we will be looking for a similar study in the UK, because in so many cases, even if a child survives the cancer, treatments are so harsh that they will have a lifelong impact. Some so severe that they don't even get to leave hospital. And then she finally said in a new message since then, so we are rating it as cancer win. So we're rating the survival as a cancer win. But she said it's not a win for the child. And I think that's a really powerful thing for someone who's got that job of running the task force to be accepting and acknowledging. So please exploit the opportunities you have as constituents. Every one of you has an MP, whether you know it or not, or know who they are, or even whether they've engaged with you. Please use it. And I will do what I can after this, Dominic, to see what we can do to make sure that everybody has a voice into the task force, whether it's some sort of national consultation, but all around this particular subject. because as Dominic said, we know what's needed. We know it's possible. I know it's possible, and I talked earlier, Dominic, in our group, about if you can get it right for people on the Isles of Scilly, 28 miles off Land's End, if you can give them the kind of access, they're not going to get the same access as someone living in London, but actually that they have the same opportunity and support for life, then we can pretty much do it anywhere. Maybe not in, well, no, I won't give them. Thanks for that. But I think I just want you to actually be empowered to use your MP for how the city is.
Now, our three other panellists, do they want to come in on this as their own thoughts, having dealt with NHS England, for example?
Well, so I have tried to get this commission back in 2010 when we were just looking at craniopharyngiomas, and we were in competition. Epilepsy, which is also a highly specialist surgical service, is commissioned to one or two centres and requires specialist surgeons, but around the specialist surgeons they also have very comprehensive medical assessments, neuroscience assessments, no endocrine assessments. So endocrinologists always get, we're kind of pushed into the corner, and I don't think people realise how important we are, because things don't become evident, and because generally people think you can just give a shed load of hormones and everything's okay. But there are plenty of children in this audience that will tell you just the journey of having hormones and needing hormones throughout your life to grow is not the same if you're a child that's prepubertal and got all your growth and development ahead as it is if you're a post-mature adult. And I also think that we're duty-bound to collect the health outcomes that Guy charged us with, and to collect them separately for children who are children at diagnosis as opposed to adults or post-mature young adults at diagnosis, because their outcomes will be different. And we need to do that for a lot of conditions. And what's more, when we created these guidelines, there was minimal evidence. Yeah. And if we're bound to update them in 5 years, we need to have some evidence. And in such rare diseases, we won't have that evidence unless we collect it nationally. And in my experience, things work better if they're national. We have national services for, in endocrinology, children's hyperinsulinemia. And when it's commissioned by NHS England to one or two centres, yes, it can create problems, and maybe not everything needs to be in one centre, and I agree with that. But the data is collected because we're charged to collect it, and you don't get funding, and you get some help. So I do think there are benefits in getting this commissioned, and I do think we have an argument because it's inequitable and children are disadvantaged. And in my opinion, that's newsworthy. And I intend to have a voice on the news if it doesn't happen. So I do think that's important. But I would like to think with you, and what's the wonderful thing about today, and I want to thank everybody that's here now, is that we have the beginnings of a very multi-professional specialist, highly specialist audience, and who are key. And we've never had so many different groups together. And as Darren says, in the oncology forum, there are surgeons, there are oncology physicians, and there are radiation oncologists, and there are histopathologists. But I'm the only endocrinologist. And there are no pituitary surgeons, and there aren't many neurosciences, there aren't allied therapies. And so we're dividing the body up into bits, and it doesn't work, especially when you are a child that needs holistic care. So somehow, if we can grow this forum so that we can have all these professionals with the young people themselves actually creating something, I think we can use this as a useful means of going forward. And I would be keen to think with you and to have, at the end of the day, some members who are keen to help us drive this together, and how we drive both the recovery element, which which is for every child, because I'd like to think with the professionals how we use their innovative research to do it for every child and get national data so that we can evaluate the programme and improve on it and see if it works. And maybe, actually, in some cases, we need less drugs. We need more time to rehabilitate. We need more time to do what we know works. And also how we streamline the top panel so that we don't duplicate what's already happening, but we siphon off children with brain tumours from a much bigger, what we call late effects cancer service. Because I've always felt that there's fewer of them, they have less of a voice, they're more vulnerable, and they're very, very different. So they need their own pathway within children's cancer services.
Anyone else on this want to come in? Jay?
Having written the service specification that was quoted about neurorehabilitation, and the fact that that hasn't translated into the teams there for children with an acquired brain injury, I know the problem is not easy to solve by writing a guideline. But I do know other things as well. One, I've learned that the patient voice is powerful. And so your testaments and your voices to us and does work, it does matter, it does make a difference. And two, I think that with the people that Helen's got together, there is a link with every children's cancer unit in the country. And the message going back to them now is that we need other members of their worthy teams. And those things aren't too difficult. When you have new consultant job plans, you can write it. You can put sessions in for people like myself, or Badisha, or Jill, or Denise. You can do it within organisations. And I have done it. I know it costs a bit of money, but there isn't millions compared to the millions on proton pumps, compared to the millions chemotherapy. So where the clinicians are being told, that is what best practice looks like, they can create it. They have got powers as well. And lastly, we do need the Children's Commissioners to stand up and ask in their regions, hang on, that region there is getting this. Why isn't my population getting that? And that is their job. It's in their specifications. They should be enacting it. So the patient voice, the clinicians making job plans, and telling the commissioners to get their act together and advocate for their populations.
Brilliant.
Oh, it is working. So the first thing to say, Derek, actually, is that we hosted Caroline Dinage, who I have to say I do think is a real ally. I very much believe that she's on board for this. And we actually had the Secretary of State accompany her. So there is the Childhood Cancer Task Force. Now, in fact, the 3 workshops, of which 2 of them I'll be going to this week, did not mention survivorship or rehabilitation at all. But I did, with Victoria Atkins listening, mention that survivorship must be included. And Caroline told me that it will be, even if it's not in the first workshop. So as Derek's been saying, it's really important to keep that pressure up. So at least when we hopefully give them the solution, it will be something that's not completely new to them. I would break this down. I think the pituitary tumours are different than the recovery pathway. I think the pituitary tumours is a very rare population that needs a very, very, very specific skill set. And I think it is possible that one can make an argument with these new guidelines that if they are not able to be delivered, then that could be something that requires highly specialised commissioning. I just fear somewhat that actually not to put all your eggs in that basket. But I think that we can actually, for that group, say, look, we've got a consensus now. This is how they should be treated from there. I think that the recovery pathway for all children that won't work that way. I just think that, well, one, we want to be providing care local to home and in schools and education, etc. But two, I think there's also probably not completely a one-size-fits-all for each region. I imagine a large city is going to be different than the Isles of Scilly, etc. But what we must do is provide people with a very clear clarity of what is expected. And I, like you, have been involved with writing some of these specifications, and unfortunately, sometimes they're just too woolly. So actually, the one that's in there, providing neuro rehab at certain time points, people possibly think they're ticking the box, but actually it's delivering nothing. So I think we need the same clarity of what good looks like from there. Now, it may be that there's existing standards that it's not being clear we should be adhering to, in which case we need to make that very clear, or that we have, this success recovery pathway. With them, I think then what we need to do is say, look, you need to make this work. It is your responsibility to do that. And that probably will be at regional commissioning level. And make all of the trusts and the people responsible be aware that these exist, and do you actually measure those? And as you know, I think Daniel was speaking earlier, and we're trying to see whether we ourselves are doing that in our patch in Great Ormond Street and North Thames. But then I think we have to be slightly pragmatic. And we need to be aware that there may need to be some degree of flexibility in how you achieve that. And that may be that in some areas it requires a key investment. However, I, like many people, believe that this idea that it is somebody's named responsibility to be their rehabilitation or recovery manager, coordinator is key. We have that for the acute oncology part. We have that for the acute neurosurgical part. But what we don't have is, in most places, it may be different in your area, but is anybody that's their responsibility. And of course, that is from day one. It is not from 5 years after you've been diagnosed and everything's happened. It's from day one. And I think when you've got that, that means that that person who may be regional will develop a better understanding of what's available in their area for children, where there are gaps which can be fed back, etc. But they will actually check in. They will be the people that will take that burden of responsibility that should be not lying on patients and their families to undertake at the time when they're going through cancer treatment or trying to recover from it. And that in itself will be helpful. But actually, they can actually be that key point. Because the truth answer is that when you come up and have your clinic with me, for neuro-oncology, we'll focus on the tumour, and we'll focus on whether your tumour's gone, come back, etc. And actually, the rehabilitation needs the same degree of focus, the same degree of specialisation available to them. But it's more complex because it needs to be delivered across a whole network, which actually means the centralised services that you might have at a tertiary centre, but actually then when you go home, your local hospital, your local child development centre, your local physiotherapist, in school, etc. So I think that the coordinators will be a really key aspect in this. And I suspect that is not too big an ask, I don't know, financially, to actually start to consider. Because I think that what NHS England and in the devolved nations, because we must remember them too, but also politicians, is they like us to provide them with solutions, not just to whinge all the time. So we need a solution. It needs to be a pragmatic thing, and it needs to be something that probably is realistic that we can achieve. And we might have to achieve it in steps. We might have to actually do this, because what we all want is an improvement on what we see here. And what we all want is equity for every child and every family, so they know they're going to get the same level of standard, might be achieved in a different way, but that same level of standard across the whole of the UK. So those are my thoughts about how we can take this forward. But actually, we then need, I can't remember what you've called it, an action for change team or whatever, which to actually start to really put that into practice and to provide people with, this is what we believe could be the solution, and also recognise where we're doing things well, because that sometimes also helps.
Thank you. Can I just chuck in a question, which in a sense I don't know the answer to. It's always a dangerous question to ask. You mentioned devolved administrations, and of course health is devolved in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, sort of, and they've got a proper system running. And of course, there's also what goes on the continent in other countries which have health services. And I did just wonder whether there were any comparators that one could look at in terms of the sort of care we are talking about, which exist out of England. It may be that because England may well be the hub for treatment right throughout the UK, it's not relevant, or maybe Scotland does something different. I just wondered if the clinicians could add anything. Are there examples in France or Germany or Italy or Spain which suggest that other countries with health services are actually managing this better? Because that's always quite a useful thing to put in front of government.
I don't think they are, and of course America's very different because it's all under insurance anyway. And England's very different because we do provide for the child, and the NHS has never had any money. There's a wonderful book out which says Fighting for Life, the 12 battles of the NHS. It's been around for 75 years and I've worked for 43 of them in it. And there's never been any money, and it's always who shouts loudest and who's most heroic that gets the attention. And the trouble is that heroism is all very well, but the NHS was there to care, not to experiment. And if we are actually caring for the children that we are saving now who would have previously died, I think we're duty-bound to make sure that their lives are fully restored. And that's what we promised with our heroism. And that's why we need to get to work together as a team, because the care of the child is now so divided up. The surgeon does one thing, may never see the child again. The physician gives the oncologist. As they survive, they get parted on and so on. So I think that I would like to at least say that every child has a baseline, that we know what the baseline looks like, so that in the future we can assess the follow-up. And I might add that when the government gave, was it 30 million for proton beams on a wish that we thought it would do well, they acknowledged that there wasn't actually any evidence that it would save the brain. We were to provide that evidence. In the meantime, we'd been developing very good IMRT focused techniques for which we didn't have the outcome data for. And there's lots of baseline endocrinology, baseline cognitive assessments, which were supposedly funded in the bid, but nobody ever gets to see the result, nobody ever gets to implement it, and where is that data now? And I don't think that's excusable. So I would say that any child who enters any treatment for a cancer, especially if it's a trial, whoever's funding that trial should fund in some quality of life measures, because that's costing the NHS an awful lot of money at the moment, and drug companies are generally funding a lot of that. And part of the outcome measures are based on health outcomes that we should be monitoring and are blaming on treatments, which I don't think is true either. And it would inform our better treatments. It would inform when to do surgery. It would inform whether radiotherapy is all bad. It would inform whether rehabilitation actually makes a difference. But we have to have that baseline. And I would like to think that at least that is promised, and that no surgeon should operate unless he knows he's got a rehabilitation team behind him.
Thank you. Does anybody else, thank you very much, on the point which I raised? Is there any good practice which can be used to feed into our model?
Well, Australia have some good examples of paediatric rehabilitation for the whole childhood population of rehabilitation need. For example, paediatric rehabilitation services in the UK are neglected.
Yeah.
People forget that children have strokes, and they forget that children who survive brain tumours have ongoing long-term needs. And repeating, I beg your pardon, Dame Dinich, but we don't need to repeat what America's done. 100% of 50-year-olds.
No, we know.
No,
We know it's the same.
we know.
Yeah.
So, but there are some good examples in rehabilitation, and I say Australia perhaps is an exemplar of that. I can't speak of any European countries. I'm currently on a nice guideline committee looking at this question, and there ain't much research. So,
You've answered my question. Thank you. I'm conscious that we're coming to a point where we might like to talk about the change programme and how we do that. But did any survivors want to come in on any of the points that have just been raised from their own experience or feed anything in? I think there are some roving microphones if anybody wanted to make a contribution. I didn't just want to keep it to the panel. If not, we will move on. But if any... Yes. NOS doesn't matter if you're not a survivor. You're a participant. So I think... the great thing about human beings is we can moderate each other's views by an exchange, so please participate.
There's one up at the back.
Right, we'll come on to that in a moment. Yeah.
I don't know where to start, but I've got quite a bit to say. I'll try and keep it short. I think we're talking about a pathway that's 1.5. It's between 1 and 2. The reason we can't go to pathway 2, and I say this after 30 years of working at Great Ormond Street with many, many different paediatric populations, and I'm part of neurodisability, and I interact with neurodisability services all around the country, so I'm highly aware of what's going on, including Cornwall. I see quite a few patients, not the Isles of Scilly though, but I know it well. But the problem is that the way our child development services are organised is, number one, we do not have neuropsychology in any community child development service. So we've already talked today about how important for brain tumours, if we're talking about habilitation, we have to understand how it's affecting cognition and learning. So that's the first problem. If we send all children back, because they come back to us, and I'm neurodisability at Great Ormond Street. So that's the first problem. On top of that, if they've got additional needs of visual impairment, that's even more specialist, vision, neurodisability, pediatrics and psychology. We've talked today about mental health. I've met many, many children, not only with brain tumours, but many other pediatric conditions. They're wonderful children with wonderful families. They never meet criteria for CAMS because we have in the community many, many children who have got very serious mental health problems. All children are on waiting lists now of 1 to 2 years. We cannot meet the demands. We have huge mental health problems. I was reading on one of our Braveheart, I think it was Laura who wrote, thank you Laura, very wonderful about her own story. But looking back, nobody had ever offered, I hope you don't mind if she's here, any counselling support either to her or to her family in her journey. If it doesn't come from paediatric services, there is no one locally. We talked about autism. Children at the moment, and again, it's going through the roof, the numbers of children are waiting up to 2 years for autism diagnoses and assessments. Now, our children will get dismissed, really, because they try and fit in, they're at schools. It does not look like they have the kind of concerns that many children in the community have. So that is just thinking about how do we meet the combined. I am convinced, and Helen will be pleased to hear this, I'm not saying it's a supernumeracy service, but I think there needs a national framework. I'm absolutely convinced, and the reason why is that I actually have to argue in my own service at Great Ormond Street to see some of the children I see. My own team have already sufficient outpatient referrals from every paediatrician across the country. We don't particularly want to receive more patients from our oncology colleagues. I'm the one who actually argues, but I won't be at Great Ormond Street forever. I recognise why it's important. It's not even it's not even easy at tertiary level because we have equal demands coming in from outpatients. So my feeling is this is not necessarily a higher cost. It's a framework that gives everybody a recognition, and then we can start saying if we need more staff, or those that are there can say, do you mind, to our different team leads or clinical managers, that child coming in, I do need to see on this national framework. It might only be one child a month, but I need to be able to say, I've got a framework that says I have to see that child. It makes a huge difference. And it could lead to some changes at local service, because some of us believe there should be more cognitive psychology going on at child development teams. There used to be, and they'll push them across to CAMS. So there is a need. There are many others who want to work on that. That might be something to come up to Parliament. We are underserved as certain specialties locally. But I think it is absolutely true. We want to embed the child in their community services. The other thing I find as a final point is it is true, if we hold everything at tertiary, our community service automatically say we can't do it. We haven't got the expertise. They always push back. And then we push back. So it is not a good model that we hold everything at tertiary. And then we're accused of being ivory tower because we're not sharing our expertises. And I work a lot in Europe on certainly vision-based things. It is not better. There are centres of excellence, but it's a model we've moved away from. We have the best framework. It's just how do we make it work for rare conditions? That's always been a Great Ormond Street challenge. How do we make our incredible universality of the NHS work for rare conditions? It has to be a combined tertiary, secondary, in my view, and primary. It can't be we just push back. So I'm sorry to talk so long, but
No,
and definitely we need that national framework recognised.
Thank you. I'm conscious that we are running out of time because at least one person on this panel needs to be on a train to travel quite a long distance, and he's stayed in London rather than being in North Cornwall, to which he has to return. Was the one final brief? Yes.
Sorry, I'll just make a really quick comment.
Yeah.
This is a complex, rare disorders, and they require complex solutions. And Helen's vision is fabulous for tackling those different components. I think Darren's comments were really pragmatic and really sensible. And I think one of the big issues here is the communication, and if you like, the strap lines to help people like Derek navigate the support he needs to try and help Helen and Darren. So Derek, have you got the strap lines in mind, and how do you think we can improve the communication aspects in order to get people on board with these complex rare conditions?
I think we do know enough. I think the problem is, and I think it's a terrible problem for the British democratic system, is that people that could do the change and could make this happen are so busy with dealing with the immediate challenge that we haven't got the thinking time and the breadth and the, if you like, the bandwidth to do the projecting forward. And that saddens me because there's so many things we could actually fix quite easily if we just took the helicopter view and did that. So government needs to be able to give control away a bit to things like task force and to even cross-party groups, even create royal commissions if needed, because actually the worst thing about politics and parliament, and this will be true of every party, it's not a party political thing, is that when you get elected you seem to think that you're the ones to fix it, and I think that's what we've got to change. So I think we do know. I think we know what needs to be done. So it's a waffly political answer, which I think Helen was accused of a minute ago, avoiding answering the question. But I think, go back to what I said earlier, is just exploit the access to your MP and get them to keep pressure up. And I'll certainly keep doing what I'm doing, and Helen and others. Lord Sandhurst does his job of rattling the cage. But I think we have seen quite a shift in understanding, and that will eventually get, I don't want to use the word eventually, but it will get in the right direction. We are in the right direction.